So that's where we start talking about, adjusting to retirement, right? And this is one that, Bruce uses a lot. Like it doesn't have to be a light switch. You don't have to just say, today's
Welcome
the
to the Live Greater View, a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in.
All right, Chris, get us started off. We thought we'd start with something a little different. True or false? 1 in 3 retirees feel depressed after retiring.
Sad, but true. Very real part of what we do. Something that we try to talk about a lot, get out in front of, something that we're going to unpack today, but I think it's true.
Yeah, and this was a statistic we found on WebMD. So for those of you who self-diagnose, know that this might be an issue you'll be Googling later. But so welcome back. I'm Rose Price, partner and certified financial planner here at VLP.
And I'm Chris Mullen, partner and CFP at VLP.
All right. So today's topic, adjusting to retirement. This is one that comes up a lot. And, it's not just about the numbers and the financial and having enough funds to be able to do retirement. What we're really going to dive into is what's in addition to the money.
Yeah. And, when we have initial consultations, let's say we're talking with somebody who's 5 to 10 years out from retirement, they come to us and they say, hey, here's my spreadsheet that I have. And they're so proud. They have everything, broken down by buckets and expenses and assets and all that stuff. And that's great.
Yep.
And we'll acknowledge that. But then we start asking them questions. Have you thought about what retirement looks like to you?
Yep.
Have you thought about how you're wired? Have you thought about what it's going to look like in the early phase and late phases? And all of a sudden you just see a blank stare.
Yeah, this comes up a lot. And, we have clients who get to that point where they're ready to be done. The day-to-day, the drag of work, whatever it is. But then they hit the reset button and they're like, well, now what? I mean, the honeymoon phase is great, right? We have clients who I was born to retire. I don't know how I worked before. But the difference is those clients have thought through, they have hobbies, they have something that keeps their mind active. Maybe they're on boards, they're playing pickleball, whatever it is. But the reality is we have a lot of clients who they were so working, work was everything. They were there 50, 60 hours a week. So they really didn't have time for other things outside.
Right. And I think that a lot of the value that we had, obviously on the asset management side, it's a lot of the technical pieces, but this is just as important, or arguably even more important, where we say, hey, have you thought about this? What do you think about that? And obviously there's no right or wrong answers.
Yep.
But if we're not facilitating those conversations, odds are they're not, going to think about those things on their own time.
Yeah. So let's enter another statistic. So according to the 2022 Retirement Confidence Survey, 21% of retirees rate their quality of life as worse than expected.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's another sad, statistic. But again, I think it's more emphasis of there's 2 key numbers there. And obviously that's enough evidence to say, hey, this is something that needs to be talked about and acknowledged.
Yeah. And I think the big piece is, that transition, it's not, it's first they have to get over the psychological of no paycheck, right?
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about with clients about how does your assets now replace the paycheck? You're paying yourself. It's that new paycheck, whether it's Social Security, you're lucky enough to have a pension, or how do you get those assets? Because we are so ingrained to save, right? We're taught, okay, we got to put money in our 401k. We got to save for a rainy day. And you do that for 40, 50 years. And now you're going, well, wait a minute, I can't save anymore.
Right. What do I do? And the psychological aspect of seeing that number go up and up over, 40 years. And sure, there's going to be bear markets and pullbacks and things like that. But when that happens, typically we're trained to say, hey, that's okay. The market will eventually come back. We're just going to buy at lower levels, and that, takes care of itself. But then when you say, okay, that's my final paycheck, I've likely hit close to the high watermark, maybe not in some instances, but close to that high watermark. Now, all of a sudden, I'm going to need to convert that bigger number into everyday living expenses.
Yeah. And then they get paralyzed, right? They're afraid to start spending money. And that's where we have this conversation about what are you going to retire to? Do you want to do charitable? Do you want to donate time? Do you want to donate money? Do you want to do both? Do you have activities? Do you want to travel? A big one we see, one of the largest goals we see outside of basic expenses is usually travel, especially in the early years.
For sure. And I think that we start this conversation again, well in advance. And my context to clients as they move closer and closer to retirement is to really just say, hey, how are you wired? What in your gut, what do you think this is going to look like? Obviously, no right and wrong answers. But I'm a firm believer that, you're wired the way that you're wired, and you can't expect somebody that's been go for 40 years just all of a sudden to stop and not do anything.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
So that's where we start talking about, adjusting to retirement, right? And this is one that, Bruce uses a lot. Like, it doesn't have to be a light switch. You don't have to just say, oh, today's the day, I flip it to retirement and I'm out. You can do a dimmer switch, right? Maybe you can go and say, well, I was working 40, 50 hours a week. Now I'm just going to dim back to 30 and then maybe 20 and then 10. Because then that gives you time to say, what am I going to do in that extra time? What are the new hobbies? What is the hobby I neglected? Maybe it's spending time with my kids and my grandchildren, or it's traveling. But it gives you that opportunity to start transitioning to what does the new normal look like? And then in some cases you can go, well, I'm still bad at golf, but I'm going to spend more time golfing. It gives you that ability to kind of start doing that transition on your own terms. And also gives you the ability to give a little glimpse of what it might look like.
Right. And the pandemic, that obviously was, kind of an open, view into that, where obviously everybody's forced to work from home, and that kind of gave clients a dry run. And we had our fair share that said, hey, you know what? Like I said, I'm going to retire. We definitely had our fair share that said, hey, 2 or 3 weeks at home was great, but I'm ready to get back in a routine. So it's funny, how that worked out.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. I mean, routine is really one of the biggest things we see clients struggle with, because let's face it, when you don't have work or volunteering or somewhere to go, you don't have to be up or dressed or even showered.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, we talk about, hey, what's this going to look like as far as a dimmer switch? Let's talk about some of the things that's related to setting personal goals.
Yeah. And that's a big thing. If you, as we had worked, especially if you've been high functioning, you've really climbed the corporate ladder, you set a lot of goals and you hit those milestones. Yeah. And it's kind of, we have to talk about, like, what's that going to look in retirement? What are some of the things you want to do? Maybe now you want to get your golf game down. You want to travel to these 5 places, whatever that may look like, or you want to spend more time with the family and more vacations. So it's kind of coming back and saying, okay, let's map out what do those goals look like. And the planning software allows us to do that easily, right? We spend a lot of time with clients going through, like, okay, let's put these goals in. And sometimes they change, which is good. But it allows you to kind of start thinking about, what are the things I want to do? Do I want to maybe go and take some courses at a university? Do I want to pick up painting? What are the things that you were interested in but never had time to do? Let's set some of those goals and milestones to, again, give you something to look forward to, and then hopefully have kind of some routine and structure.
Right, and purpose. And when I think about, like, the different areas that those tend to fall into, just as far as a pattern that I've seen across clients, they tend to be, a handful. One is, a goal as far as like a personal hobby. Like, hey, I love to golf, or I haven't had the time to, paint or do glasswork or something like that. So that's more on the personal side. The second one tends to be more family oriented.
Yeah.
So, hey, you know what? I love seeing my grandkids around the holidays, but I'd really like to see them more. I'm going to try to set a goal to see them X, times a year, and something to that effect. And then finally, kind of the third, part of that is something charitable.
Yeah.
Where it's, I want to be involved in a soup kitchen, or, something like that, where it's, hey, I have something that's personal, something that's family related, something that's more community related. Just an interesting combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And that balance gives clients, opportunity to kind of pick and choose, and then manage their own schedule, which, typically when in your working years, your schedule is not your schedule. It's, it's work. So that's kind of a good thing too. One of the things we have to talk about is, being realistic. We have this conversation and I'm like, well, I want to spend $100,000 on travel, and like, okay, that's great. Well, where are you going to go? And then we find clients go, that was great, but I don't like being away from home that long, or, these other things pop up, or even, just realistic about what you can physically do, right? If there's certain things that may hold you back, if you decided you wanted to now become a triathlete, is that possible? Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, the thing that comes to mind there for me is it's a process.
Yep.
It's a process of going through this phase, obviously, moving into retirement. It's not going to be something where it's, hey, from day one, I have it figured out. I always counsel clients and say, hey, there's going to be a 5 to 6 months, sometimes even longer adjustment period where it's new routine, new, sort of flow with the finances. All of those sort of things obviously combined say, hey, this is your new life. And it's not going to be, whoa, I have it figured out from day one.
Yeah. I tell clients, expect it to be a year or two for you to settle in your new normal. Because you may know out of the gate and you may get lucky. You may hit it up. This is exactly what the new normal is going to be. Or it could be, well, it turns out I really suck at painting, or I don't like painting, or whatever it is. But I found this new hobby, or my friend took me to this, and now I want to engage in that. And that's part of the part of just allow yourself to try new things. Yeah. That's part of the psychological where we find clients get paralyzed, and we say, look, go try new things. Go. Your friends, join them, do things like that, your family, whatever, because it really does give you an opportunity to kind of find out what's going to fit for you.
For sure. And, the other tip that comes to mind is, as we're kind of alluding to all of these things, it obviously takes effort.
Yep.
And that, final, tip that we have is really put forward the effort to set yourself up for success.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, that's a good time to review all of your accounts, your documents. Where do you want to live? A lot of times we have clients who want to move, right? They want to be closer to family or friends in that scenario. And they're like, oh, I'm just going to sell and buy a house over here. And I said, okay, well, before you do that, why don't maybe we Airbnb a place and we see if A, if you like the area, B, if that's where you want to be. And sometimes they already have a place, right? They have a second home that's going to be eventually their home. But we have seen that's been a good opportunity to go, okay, go explore places. And Airbnb makes it really easy to go try out communities in certain towns and areas.
For sure. And I would just echo that same sentiment. When we're thinking about changes like that, the more gradual, the better.
Yeah.
Over time, I've had, I can think offhand of 3 clients that have rented before they actually moved to the beach or an apartment, downsizing, stuff like that. So I would definitely echo that same sentiment.
Yeah, that one's worked out really well. I've had lots of clients and, and some it's been, yep, that was a great area. Someone's like, well, it was actually, a little bit over, or we ended up being able to, figure out what would make sense. So, but yeah, I think the bigger thing too is how are you going to keep your mind active? That's a big one, and that's where we see a lot of clients where this could really, if they don't have something that's keeping them sharp or thinking or engaged, where we've seen declines pretty quickly.
Now, do you, when we're going through our planning software, obviously we'll, plan for retirement, and typically we'll have 2 or 3 different scenarios, that could play out during retirement. Do you see clients changing that inevitably when they get to retirement, or by that point, do you normally have it narrowed down to just 1 or 2? Like what kind of divergence do you see there?
No, it depends if you've got a married couple can go anyway. Sometimes we're up to 4 scenarios, right? Because I actually just had a great meeting today, and one is very hobby intensive, and he's like, "Yeah, I know some of this is gonna have to end because my salary is gonna go away," and one who's not and says, "Well, then there's gonna be my hobbies that are gonna come along." I think it's good to have those options available because I think, certainly as you enter that phase, you're just trying to figure out what that's going to look like. What is the new normal going to be? And it gives them kind of that leeway to say, well, I'm thinking it might be this, it might be that, or it might be something completely different over here. But now if we've kind of thought through it and planned, we got, they can see, hey, this hobby, which is really expensive, or maybe this, traveling, if I wanted to travel in the first 5 years. Because, one of the things we talk about with travel a lot is, they didn't get to do the trips they wanted to do, or they couldn't go as long because of work and obligations, whether it's family and kids and such. They may travel a lot more in the first few years or 5 years. Right. And we usually have the conversation that you are likely as healthy as you will be from now going forward, unless very rarely, sometimes it's people, you retire and then you have more time to do exercise and do those things. But, you're probably the youngest and healthiest you're going to be at that point. Right. So they'll tend to, if they're going to go hike, a glacier or something like that, they're likely going to do that earlier, and that's going to trail off. So, they start to narrow down over time, but I think the first couple of years we're looking at all the options and possibilities. What do you usually see?
I would say the same thing. I would say usually, 5+ years out, it starts with 3 to 4 scenarios.
Yeah.
And the closer and closer that we get to retiring and then actually retirement, it usually narrows down to one or two, just because I think that your priorities, obviously shift the closer you get to actually crossing that bridge and retiring, where you say, hey, you know what, like I don't need to do that or need to make that big of a change. So I would say that they definitely narrow down, and typically like there's two, I would say on average that we maintain. And then for older clients, obviously once they're settled, then it's not, as prevalent to have multiple scenarios.
Yeah. But usually we get into scenarios of then charitable or gifting or leaving a legacy for the family. So all great points. So let's kind of transition to some of the questions we talk to clients about. These are the things they really need to explore and ask themselves as they're making that transition. So one of the first is, what will your purpose be in retirement?
Definitely. And I think that comes back to, how are you wired? Are you somebody that is, hey, I'm a family person. I'm going to spend time that I haven't been able to with my family and extended family. Or are you somebody that's more type A and you need to be engaged on boards, nonprofits, stuff like that? That would be where my thoughts go as it relates to that.
Yeah, and what is your balance going to look like? If you were someone who was functioning and you want to have that, is there going to be balance? What is that going to look like? How many boards should you be on? How many should you not? So that's a good one. I think the other one is, how do I want to stay engaged in retirement? I think this one is a big one that a lot of our clients, as they approach, don't often think of. Yeah. Because they're thinking, I just need to get to the finish line and cross. And we're saying, okay, but now that you've crossed, like, what's your engagement going to look like? Is it none, zero, some, 20, whatever?
Yeah. And it's a long, it's all, obviously relative, but you're saying, hey, you have, 30 years in front of you, it's a long time. So definitely something that you need to put some thought into. The next one I think is really important. It kind of gets back to some of the statistics that we shared before. As just, hey, it's not always going to be, sunshine and green grass. There's going to be
rainbows and Skittles.
Yeah, rainbows. Yeah, So that question is, who will I lean on if I struggle during retirement?
And this really comes back. This is where we see, where are they going to live, right? If they don't have, if their children aren't around here, maybe they have a good friend, strong friend group. But as you all age together, that becomes a concern. What if you need assistance? We have this conversation all the time with my own mom, where, she didn't live near family. And we'd say, she's like, oh, my neighbors are great and this and that. I said, yeah, but they're not your family. Like, when you need help and it's consistent, one-offs are great. But if this is a prolonged period, who's going to be able to step in and really help you when you need, groceries and those types of things? So it's something we really think about. And if you don't have family, who are we going to hire for that support? What are some of the resources available in your community that you want to be available to you?
And I think this ties back to some of the points that we were making before of when you do initially retire, making that effort to have those relationships.
Yes.
Because the last thing that you would want to happen is just to, go through this phase, kind of lose touch with your closer, friends and your network, and then time to go by, and then, be in a situation where you're saying, hey, I really don't have anybody that I can lean on.
Yeah. And isolation is one of the number one issues we see in retirement, where we can really see people start to go downhill. Because if you don't have that interaction, you don't have the ability, to engage, whether it be mentally, physically in activities or with people, that can really be a recipe for disaster.
For sure. And the next one, really important, obviously, none of this happens if you don't have your health. So, how will I maintain my health and wellness during retirement? Yeah,
this is a big one. We've seen clients who get to retirement and all of a sudden that's the big switch. They now have time to get into shape and do certain things, but it comes back to that balance. Like if you go from you're in a position or a job where you're active and you're out and you're moving, and now you're just kind of sitting at home catching up on your Netflix, what is that going to do long-term for the health? So again, it all comes back to not only the mind, but the body, and how are you going to keep it all? What do you want it to look like, and how are you going to maintain that?
Yeah. And, you meet with somebody that's in their early to mid 70s, and let's say that they're not in the best shape. And then I always think, okay, they're doing their best, but it's not ideal. But they did not, get to that point from the get-go. That's somebody that's likely in their 60s. They weren't taking care of themselves, and it's just kind of on the margin, not maintaining their health and wellness. And then obviously it just builds up gradually over time.
Yeah, and this kind of, this one kind of roads into where you want to live. Like in our area in Northern Virginia, there's lots of opportunities for retirement communities. And as soon as we talk about retirement communities, some clients immediately go to nursing home, but that is not the case in a lot of these. I mean, we have some very active adult communities where people are moving in and there's all these activities. There is, the pickleball group, the bocce ball group, the list goes on. There's swimming, there's all kinds of things to do. And I had clients who moved in their early 60s and they're as busy as they can be. Mm-hmm. They never come in for a client meeting. We have to do it because, they fit me in between all their activities. So that comes into, that lifestyle too. And that also gives you the ability where you're going to be around you're around people all the time. If you want to be, you don't have to be, but they're having that kind of lifestyle where, hey, I want to be in a scenario where I like this area, because that is a big key. Like we have clients who don't want to leave the area because the unfamiliarity of moving to a new place. Yes, their kids live in North Carolina or wherever it is, but they don't know how to get around. And at certain points that becomes a challenge where, hey, I want to stay in Northern Virginia. If I can, but I can be in this community where now I have this community around me that if I do need help or care, I do, but I can also have access to activities and engaging.
Right. And the clients that I work with that have gone into facilities, they would
communities,
I should say, they would share that you can be as busy or as not busy as you want. So they're obviously everybody is somewhere on that spectrum. But when you do join a community, you're not signing up for all of that. It's obviously just curated to you.
Yeah. So that goes back to, one of the last questions we talked about is, how would you describe your ideal retirement? Mm-hmm. And, I tell clients, don't feel like you have to have the exact perfect answer right now, because this is going to evolve, but you got to start somewhere. It's all about going back to having the goals, right? If you can map out, hey, this is what I think would be ideal. And then you have, as you can change and morph it into, it'll change over time, but have something mapped out that this is what this is where I want to start, and that'll help you stay on path.
For sure. Well, that's great. I think that, we obviously just went through a lot of different thoughts here, and I think that it's ironic that none of them really had to do with the market or headlines or Medicare or Social Security. Obviously that stuff is really important, but this, sort of thing is right there with it as far as importance.
Yeah, I think it's part of the whole retirement package, right? We don't just talk to you about, what's Social Security going to look like? Are you going to hit IRMA, Medicare? All those pieces important. But if you are depressed, not happy, and not in a place where you can enjoy all the hard work and all the savings you did, then, it's for naught. So it's just as important.
Great. Well, as always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We've gotten a lot of traction on our videos recently, some up near 10,000 views. So that's awesome. As always, we encourage you, if there's topics, that you'd like to hear us talk about from our experiences, please, feel free to reach out to us and submit that to us. And as always, if you find this to be helpful, please pass this along to family or friends.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Great Review. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.